Okay, great. Um, yeah, so to get it started, I'm gonna put y'all in some breakout rooms to just kind of warm up. Um, the idea is going to be that we're going to talk about refactoring today, and so I want you to answer two questions. Um, what do you already know about refactoring, and when have you? I guess it's three questions. What do you already know about refactoring? When have you implemented it and how? And what questions do you still have about refactoring? All right, what questions are coming up about refactoring? We'll spend like 4 minutes on this, come back and discuss, and then we'll jump in. All right, looks like we have everyone back. I'd love to hear from a few of you. So let's start with Hope. What did you and your group talk about?
Well, largely just like the definition of refactoring, what it means, and how it has an impact on your code.
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
very obviously, if you trim down your code, it's going to make it more efficient and readable. And both of those are big.
Totally agree. Yeah, those are like two of the big things that are kind of like the point of refactoring, right? Like readability and then efficiency. I don't want to get it confused with like actually like runtime, like how much time it takes to like process the code. But like the more efficient a developer that maybe is unfamiliar with the code base is at coming in and getting familiar with the code base really quick because they're small methods and they're named properly, that is efficiency, and that is like what refactoring can give to us. Cool. So let's hear from someone else. Hash, what did your group talk about?
Yeah, pretty much the same thing. It's just that refactoring, can make the code work, but or more efficient and yada and easier to read. But we talked about our hesitations with refactoring. Obviously, when you kind of get towards the end of a project or something, and then you want to go in and refactor it, you kind of have that nervous of breaking everything. So I guess it might be better to refactor in smaller chunks. Maybe when you're done with a class, maybe just refactor the one class, or maybe when you get halfway through a big class, maybe refactor it then to try to, cut it up into smaller. So by the time at the end of the project, you don't have to go through everything and refactor at one time.
Totally. Yeah, I want to hit on two things that you said there. Yes, I think it's best to approach refactoring as something that you might want to try and do like every day or every other day, because like you said, at the end of the project, you have that anxiety about like, oh no, I might break things. And it's harder to just like think like, okay, I'm going to just refactor today and like know that like there's a ton of like long methods and a ton of work that's been built up that you haven't addressed. And the other thing I wanted to say about that like whole anxiety piece, so if you have a great test suite, you don't need to worry about refactoring. If you can rely on this test suite telling you like, yes, these methods function the way that I expect, then you shouldn't have to worry about breaking up some of these methods and into smaller chunks, but yet still having the tests pass and give you the validation that, hey, yes, my code still works properly. Even though it's written differently now, it still does the same things. Cool. Yeah, thanks for sharing, Hash. Yeah, Angela, go ahead.
I have a question about like testing. So is there ever too much testing? Sometimes I feel like I could write way more tests just in case, but I'm not sure. Like I don't know when my test is like complete.
Totally. Yeah, and I don't think like you'll start to like really feel comfortable with like how much your code is tested for some time, like for some time throughout the program, even while you're on the job. Like it's an ongoing learning process. However, what I will say is it's always better to err on the side of more testing. Like the more tests that you write and create and the more things you test, then the more feedback we can give you on your test that you've created. Like, hey, this one's a little redundant. You already tested this over here. You don't need it here. Hey, look at this. You tested this, this, and this, or these three, maybe like you have this method that relies on these three methods running synchronously, and you have a test for each of those three methods, and you have a test for the integration of all these methods with one. This is great, robust testing. But if you don't write the test, then you're never going to get the feedback, right? So I would say, especially starting out Mod 1, write the test. If you can think of a test, write it, and we'll let you know why it's a good test or why it's like not a necessary test via feedback. But yeah, great question. Cool. So yeah, I'm gonna jump in to sharing some code. And so I've got this flashcards repo. This is actually a project that I built in between my Mod 1 first attempt and my Mod 1 second attempt. So I built this during the intermission week, and it's similar in structure to War Peace, so that's why I chose it, because it shouldn't be that different as far as like approaching the code. But if we look here, I've got a number of classes over here in my lib directory. I'm on the round class, and what I'll do is I'll open up the round test to be next to it. Cool. And so I've got this round test. I've run my runner. I know that this program works, and I know that I've got a test suite that is functional right now, and I can ensure that by running my round test. All right, I've got 16 assertions. I feel good about that. I've got a number of tests that I expect to work properly. And now I know that there's a lot of this code that I can refactor. All right, there's a lot of approaches I can take, and I'm going to show you two separate ways. So I'm going to show you the approach of kind of jumping into the code and breaking things out into methods when you see them. And then I'm going to also come up or show you how to TDD refactoring. And so that's what I'm going to show you first. So I look here, and one of the key things to remember with refactoring is we don't want to repeat ourselves, right? We have this concept of dry, don't repeat yourself. So anytime I see some code that's being repeated, I might want to think about like, hey, like that is probably a good place where I can break that into a method and then just call into the method. All right, and I'm going to take this example of sleep, which I can see gets called a number of times here, and it's sleep 1.5, sleep 1.5, sleep 1.5. So that's constantly being repeated. And what this does is, if you're not familiar with this method, is it delays the terminal output. So like, really, that's not even what it does. It delays the code by the number of seconds that you give it as an argument. So the code waits, stops executing, waits the number of seconds, and then continues executing. So in the case of like a terminal output, I can delay the output of my code by sleeping, and then the gate, like if I'm playing the game or running the game in my terminal, I can like see, oh, like here's set of text. Now I give the user some time to read it. Here's the second set of text. That's kind of like the point there. So what I want to do is I want to TDD this. So what I'm going to do here is grab my setup from a previous test, and you can feel free to, you can code along if you want, but you don't have to. It's kind of like up to you. I'll put that on y'all to decide. You can watch or you can code along. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new test. So I'm going to say test dynamic sleep ability. All right, and so I know I need this setup from the previous test. I know I need some cards, I need a deck, and then I need a round, which is similar to how the War or Peace game was functioning. And so I want to assert equal that 2 is returned. So another thing to know about sleep, whatever the argument you give it becomes the return value, like however many seconds you tell it to sleep is the return value. So if I want this to sleep for 2 seconds, actually let's make it 1 just to make it run quicker. So I'm going to assert equal 1, and then I'm going to say round dot delay output is the method that I'm dreaming of here, that I'm like, this is what I expect to happen. And I'm going to name, because I'm using sleep in this specific way here, where I'm delaying the output of my terminal message, I'm going to say round.delay output, and I'm going to say this takes an argument, and in this case, I'm going to pass it the argument of 1. All right, so I've kind of dream-driven how I envision this method working. I don't want to hard code the value of sleep. I want to make it a method, and I want to make it dynamic so I can pass it a value and then it'll sleep for that long. So I look at that and I say, great, let's run it. Cool, undefined method, delay output. So now I know what my next step is, right? Like I know exactly what I want to do next, and that is create a delay output method. I think I might put it up here. And where I'm putting this is kind of like choice by design. So yeah, so I'm going to TDD it, right? So I'm going to do one thing at a time. Now I've got the delay output method. Cool. Now I look. Now my error is different, right? Now it's wrong number of arguments. I know how to get that to pass. Let me give it an argument here. I'm going to say time, because that's what it represents, or actually I'll say seconds, because that's like a more accurate representation of what it is. Cool. I run it. Cool. And now what I get is a failure, expected value of 1. Over here we can see it. I get this expected value of 1, and it's actually nil because I haven't written anything here, right? I haven't done anything. So cool. Now let's make it work, right? So what I want to do is I want to sleep for whatever the number of seconds is passed in, right? That's how I want my code to run, right? So let's see if it runs. Oh, and you saw it actually did sleep there in the terminal. You can see the delay. I'll run it one more time so you can see. Slight delay. So at this point, I feel good about the test that I have. I think this is working the way that I want. And now, instead of calling sleep and then the hard-coded value of whatever I want it to be, what I will do is I will highlight each of these by doing a command control G. So now everywhere that it's that sleep 1.5 is in my class, all throughout this file, I can start typing and changing that wherever I want. All right, so I'm going to say delay output, and I'm going to pass it. It's delaying for 1.5 before, but I'm gonna, actually, I'll just pass it. I'll pass it 1.5 to keep it the exact same, because that's what it was before. So now what I've done is I've made my code more dynamic by being able to pass an argument. Now I can change the value of any of these. Maybe I say like it should only sleep for 1 second here, and it only should sleep for 1 second here. Now I have the ability to make my code more dynamic because I've said like, okay, I'm going to pass an argument, and whatever that argument it is up here, that is what is going to run. So now I can run my test suite. I've changed a bunch of things in my code, but I'm going to run my test suite. My test still passed, so I feel good about the changes that I've made. All right. Questions on this so far?
Tim, I got one quick question.
For sure.
In your test, you put the delay output, the argument as 1 in your test. Would we also want to, for testing edge cases, like put another one that tests like the 1.5?
Yeah, I love it. So that's a great recommendation. Hey, is my code actually as dynamic as I think it is? Let's pass it 1.5 instead of 1. And now it might take a little while for these to run because each time it's going to delay. Ooh, interesting. And now I have found an edge case. So something to be, this is something I didn't even know was happening under the hood. So I pass sleep a float, and it looks like it rounds up to an integer, right? That's what I see happening. I expected 1.5 to be returned, but what it did is it took my 1.5 value and it said, nope, sorry, we don't deal with floats. We're going to convert that to an integer under the hood, and we're going to actually sleep 2 seconds. So at this point, I should change my test based on what I learned, right? I learned 1.5 gets changed to 2, so I can change that to 2. And the other thing that I should probably do, okay, so now we've got another failure. Did I change the wrong one? Ooh, I did not. All right, we've got even more fun things happening that were unexpected because of the test. So I think maybe I read this wrong. Expected 1.5, actual 2. No, now it's changing to where the expected is 1 and the actual is 2. So something's going on with the sleep method that I don't even understand, right? Here's what I don't understand is I don't understand when it's going to round up and when it's going to round down. I can't tell based on this test. Let's run it one more time and see. Does it change this time as well? This time it passes. You really hate to see it because this is some functionality that you really can't predict, and I think it's because I'm passing this I'm passing it a float and it's converting to an integer. So in this case, what I'm going to do is say I think that the sleep method needs integers to run properly. Otherwise, I can't predict its behavior. So let's run it, see if it actually works this time. Cool, this time it inserts one more time just because we saw how weird that last test was. Okay, this time it's working properly. And now what I'm gonna do, based on what I learned, I would have learned any of this, like literally none of it without writing this test and accounting for this edge case that Danny brought up, which is super important. Now I realize I can't depend on 1.5 as like something that runs the same every time. So if I can't depend on my code, I don't want it. So I'm going to change 1.5 everywhere to 1 because I can depend on 1 running properly. I can depend on the integer being passed and running properly. If I pass it a float, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and hard to predict. Cool. Other questions that came up just from that. I hope that was like a good learning experience because this is why you write a robust test, right? Like I was using this method in a different way in my code when I had it as 1.5 than I was testing, right? So I didn't have a test for that before. Once I wrote the test, look at all this new information I gained. And I learned that my program was working not as I expected. Cool. Questions?
I have a question, Tim.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is it best practice, like since sleep already exists, why write a method that just implements sleep?
Totally. This was like more of an example that is like kind of built in a way where I was trying to show you like, hey, here's some repetition. I want to do 2 things. I want to make it more dynamic so I can pass it an argument each time and not hard code my argument. I want to actually have the ability to test this functionality, right? Like I can write a test for sleep now where before I couldn't. I didn't even know what sleep was actually doing before, but now that I could write a test, I could do that. And the third thing that I did is I renamed it in a way that is more clear to someone that is coming in approaching this code base by calling it delay output and then referring to sleep within that method. I can see exactly what I should expect to happen when this code executes. All right, so there's like a number of reasons why this is better than what I had before.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely, good question. Anything else coming up?
Well, I guess kind of a question, Tim. If you did in your delay output method, if you converted that to a float, so second.2f,
yeah,
would that work with your like 1.5?
Well, so I don't think so because sometimes it was coming in as an integer, sometimes it was actually coming in as a float already. So in that case where it was coming in as a float already, I wouldn't even need to convert it and it would still behave unpredictably is what it looked like to me. Yeah.
Could you do like a helper, or not a helper method, but like a single line if, saying like
I could.
sleep second, like if seconds is a float?
Yeah. So like something like this, like sleep seconds, and then unless seconds dot class float. So unless it's that, and then here I could say like, convert or round my float to an integer. I can depend on is what I would do next. Right. So now I'd make it even more dynamic where I'm accounting for this, but because I'm like coding this solution and I just figured it out, like I don't think I need to do that, but like it's possible. Okay.
Tim?
Yep, go ahead.
So your test passed and then failed, right? Without changing anything in the code?
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean we should run tests like a certain number of times each time when we're testing? Like,
I always run it twice because
okay.
like, yeah, there are these cases they come up. They don't come up that often. They are certainly edge cases where like sometimes the test passes, sometimes it fails. It's not like if you've written your test properly, that's not generally something you'll see. Me, like kind of like paranoia, OCD, whatever you want to call it, like I'll just run it a few times, just be like, let's just make sure that like something didn't come up, because I've seen it happen before, both on the job and at Turing, where it's like I wrote it in a way where sometimes this passes, but sometimes it doesn't. Race conditions are a good example of like when that can happen, when two separate entities are competing for the same piece of data and one of them is possibly changing them before the other one gets to it sometimes, and sometimes this other one gets to it. That's a race condition. Totally not something we're going to talk about in mod 1, but just like be aware that like these things exist.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. I want to give you all a palm. So let's do 5 minutes, come back at 33, and then I'll show you like one other approach, and then I'll put you in the breakout rooms to try some of this on your own.
Thank you, 33.
Thank you, 33. Danny, how do you find your unmute button so fast? Never mind. I'll ask you later.
Okay, cool. So let's jump back into it. Now I want to show you like something else I'm noticing here, where I'm going to focus on this record guess method. Now this is a great method for refactoring because there are a number of things happening that look like they are somewhat connected and related, but can certainly be broken up into something that's more testable, right? So I want to say, I'm looking at this if statement and I see that if my guess is correct, then I increment the number correct by 1, and then else I return the number correct. But I'm looking at this and I'm saying, the final thing that happens is current card plus equal to 1, so I increment the current card. So it looks like whether this runs or not doesn't actually matter, because I'm not doing anything with this value, I'm not storing it, and I'm not returning it explicitly from this method, because last line to run in a method is what is returned. So this doesn't look like it's actually necessary to me. I'm like, I coded a path that I didn't need to code. So what I will do is I will take that path out, and now I have a test suite, right? So I'll run this test suite, make sure I made a change. So it's probably best to run my suite. Cool. My suite still passes. I feel good about this change. All right. I feel good about this still working the way that I expect. I'm going to comment this one out so I don't have to wait on the sleeping. Cool. Great. Let's run it again. Okay, cool. It's running properly. So what I did is I found a path that I coded that I don't actually need here in this if-else statement. Now I'm thinking I kind of want to refactor this even more. I have this if end, but I know about guard statements that I can create with ifs, and I want to maybe create a a test for incrementing the number correct. So I'll say, I'm going to create this method, check guess, right? Now I'm not doing it the TDD way, which, let me warn you, is harder. I'm just showing you like this is a way that like you can go about refactoring without TDD, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend because it's easier to do it with TDD because you have less things to remember. So I have this check guess method, and what I want to do is I want to put this if statement, extract my if statement into this method so that I can test it. So I'm going to say, this is my method, check guess, cool. I can already see from my linter that now guess is assigned but not used. So I'm thinking I don't have access to guess within the scope of this method. So I'm saying, all right, what I want to do here is say like, I need to call this method and I'm going to need to pass it the argument of guess. So I'm going to say check guess, guess. And now I'm kind of like just flowing through this because I think I know what I want to happen. And now I'm going to say this needs an argument called a guess. Great. I believe, it's not guesses, guess. So now I believe that this code will work the exact same. And what this allows me to do is now it allows me to write a test for check guess based on whether it's correct or based on whether it's incorrect. I should be able to test both paths now. So if I run my code, test still pass, I feel good about what I did, and I expect my code still works the same way. What I really should do, though, is write a test based on the time that we have. I'm not going to write it right now. I'm going to put y'all into breakout groups. But before I do, questions on like what I just did and why I feel comfortable doing what I did, running my test suite, and then feeling like things are okay. Yeah, go ahead, Priya.
It's not really a question about the refactor. It's a vocab you use. You said your linter. Is that an add-on package that's installed that just kind of highlights? Because I just quick Googled it, but you have to install it, right?
Yep, it's an add-on package that you can install. I think mine is called like Ruby linter or something like that. Yep.
Cool.
And
Thank
it'll
you.
kind of like, yeah, it'll provide those little highlighting things when things are either wrong or like something to warn you. Other questions on this? Okay. I am going to drop your instructions for the breakout room into the channel. So you have them. 2006 backend.
Would you just make a test for that, Tim? Like just at the very bottom of all your other tests, kind of irrelevant where it goes as far as the tests are concerned?
Yeah, I would just probably create it at the bottom of the test file here. I would say like, okay, like I'm going to add a test that I just created, and I'm going to add a test for the check guess method, and I'm going to give it a scenario where guess is correct. I'm going to give it a scenario where guess is incorrect. So I'm testing both of those. And I actually didn't make a guard statement here, but let me just show you that real quick because I said I would do it. The way that this would look if it was a guard statement is we take out the end and I basically say, do this thing, increment number correct by 1 if this evaluates to true. All right, and so this is like pretty readable, I think, and what I can do to ensure things are running properly because I have a good test suite, I can run it. I made changes in my code. I have a test suite I can depend on. So now I feel good about making those changes. All right, so.
I have a really quick question, sorry.
Of course, yeah, no, go ahead, Dan.
So for helper methods, I've heard alternative sort of guidance here of you can have those in a private sort of area of your class. And since they're theoretically being tested as part of the main like method that they're helping out with, like you don't have to write tests for them. Could you clarify maybe what's like your best recommendation of should you test out helper methods, or since they're helping out a regular method that is being tested, is that necessary?
Yeah, I would say you always want to test any method that you create. You want to test for it no matter if it's a helper method or not. And don't worry too much right now about private versus public. Like, just make all your methods public for the sake of mod 1, because there just aren't that many use cases where you need something to be private in mod 1. But yeah, good
Okay,
question.
thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the instructions are there. I'll let you go through that, and we'll take probably like 15 minutes to go through this, and then we'll come back together and discuss, and that'll be it. And what I'll do is I'm going to put together like a refactor solution branch, and then I'm going to make a PR so that y'all can see like how I would go about refactoring this in a way that makes more sense. All right. Breakout groups starting now. Cool. Looks like we've got everybody back. Yeah, I'd love to get some code on the screen that is not mine, and see what some of y'all came up with. So if you were a driver and you had maybe questions about what you were doing, but you want to share what you were doing, please volunteer to do so. Otherwise, I will volunteer a group.
I can show you what we did. We weren't really sure what to do, honestly. Like, so I'll do it.
Okay.
So we're looking at this and we're like, I don't really know. We really weren't really too sure. So we were just looking at like the fact that like deck.cards.count was used on a couple occasions,
Totally.
string interpolation. So we were like, oh, maybe we create like a method that would encapsulate like that. That way we can just call something simpler in our interpolation. But we did that and then it broke. And we didn't write a test for it yet. We didn't really get that far. So I'm not really sure.
What broke? Can we run the test and see what broke?
Yeah. The our round test. So line 47, which was this guy here.
Cool.
And then 63. So basically the round.
So it looks like number correct and percent correct are possibly changed, but I don't think that should have happened from the count. I think that probably happened somewhere else.
Let me shut my other window, sorry.
It's okay. Yeah, let's see. Someone raised their hand. Who was it?
Could it be because your new count method might be overriding the old count method? So you have like deck.cards.count, but you have that inside a method called count.
Yep.
So is that calling itself?
Yeah, we were wondering about that too, because we thought, well, what if we do like deck count? But then we didn't get super far. I just figured I'd volunteer just for shits and giggles, I suppose.
Yep. Yeah, so I think like there's two things I want to break out of this. So there's actually something that I looked at and found is there. I was like, I should probably, like, since I'm calling into this cards method that lives on deck, and then I'm counting that to me makes me think that like the count of the cards should just live on deck, and then I should be able to call on the deck object a count of all the cards and refer to it that way. And so that's like what I like thought of to do. And honestly, and then I went to the deck class to see like to go create it, and I was like, oh, it's already there. I'm not using a method that I built all over the place, because at some point I used deck.cards.count. At one point I used deck.cards.length even.
Yeah.
And so these are like two separate methods doing the same thing. And I was like, all right, I definitely want to clear this up and make it very clear that I'm using, you know, this method. If you look on the deck class, Danny. Yeah, so there's already a count method that just calls into the cards that are on it and asks for the length. So I was like, oh, there's already this method that's built. I should probably use that instead of like reinventing the wheel every time I need the count in my round class. I should just use that method I've already built on my deck class.
If I could just kind of get rid of this maybe, and we could just use count in all those. It's referencing like this method here.
You could use deck.count.
In here.
Yep.
I know there's a shortcut, but I just want to practice my typing skills.
That's cool. All right, let's run the test and see. I think you might get the same error because I think it's happening from somewhere else, but let's see.
But how can you call deck on the round class?
Because if you look up at the top of the round class, there's an adder reader for deck. So that gives you method syntax for deck. So I can refer to it as @deck, or I can refer to it as deck. Either way works because I have that adder reader.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. So I think the check guess, oh yeah, it's check. It's because of what you have in check guess is why your tests are failing, because that's not what I had, right? Like.
Well, I was trying, so this is where you, it's because I took this out because I was just trying to reference for myself what it was.
Yeah, totally. So now if you run it with, yep, exactly. If you do that, I think you should get something different. Yeah, which is a passing sweet. And so that's like another thing that's going to happen in this process, right? If you make changes somewhere else that you forget to test, and then like you start doing another thing, it's super easy to kind of go down this rabbit hole of like, shit, the changes I just made are the ones that are breaking it, when actually these changes you made before and forgot to run your suite to check are the ones that are breaking it. So that's like another great lesson there. Like, hey, you change one little thing, run that suite.
So I can get rid of this completely.
Yep.
And because we're just calling it from the deck class. So we just reference that. Okay, so we just took cards out. Okay, cool. That's kind of really what we were noticing. I mean, in all fairness, refactoring and things of those natures are still something that I'm getting more acquainted with. So looking at your code, I'm like, looks great.
No, totally. But you got to have some time to dive in and get in the weeds yourself. And that's like what this is for more than anything. It's practice, right? It's practice of trying these things out. So I'll put up like a solution branch in a PR for it, but it's lunchtime. Thanks for your engagement, and thanks for doing the thing. I'll see y'all at 1 for debugging.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye.